Now let's get started with this image. The first thing I want to do is, I want to get rid of this distraction, this big branch, because we're not going to need this anyway. So I'm going to select my main layer here, the top one. We're going to be working on this, so make sure this is highlighted. And if you've done my Photoshop for Beginners course, the tool that we use to remove big distractions like this is the Content Aware tool. And how that works is, you can go over to your lasso tool to make a manual selection around it. So we're basically just encompassing this whole distraction. Okay, make sure you don't touch the cart here. Be very careful here. And boom, just this, and just encompass it like this together. And you can see it selects it. Then you can go to Edit. You can go to Fill. And you can select from Content, you can select Content Aware. So Photoshop just will stitch, everything using its Content Aware algorithm, and it'll just go away, whatever's inside the selection. And sometimes it can just take a bit of time to render this, but boom, you can see. And the important thing is, you can see if I zoom in, we avoided touching the cart. Sometimes if you touch what is necessary or what is essential, that part can come inside the selection. Okay, in that case, not a big deal. You can do Content Aware on that part again by encompassing it, Edit, Fill, Content Aware. Now I'm just going to press Control D or Command and D to deselect this, and boom, we're ready to start our work right now. Now before we start anything, I'm just going to hide this top layer, and let's even hide this, the reference layer, and I just want to make this bigger. Okay, so you can select this layer, make sure you can right click, layer 1 is selected, you can see it's highlighted, press Ctrl T or Command and T and make this as big as the canvas. Okay, right now it doesn't matter what part of the sky is coming in the frame. Right now we're just interested in just making it equal to the canvas size. Okay, and this is going to be very important when we do select and mask to refine our selection. So you'll understand why this is the case. Later on we can move it up and down once we've replaced the sky. Okay, I can keep this reference image hidden, no problem. But now you can see we have the sky which is big enough. Okay, now forget about the sky right now. Okay, for now, what we are interested right now is in making an accurate selection of this sky so that we can get rid of it. Okay, now in the Goa image where we just had those rocks, it was pretty easy to make a distinct selection of the foreground from the sky, right? But here, if I try to select the foreground by using the quick selection tool, which normally does a good job, but here it's a challenging image. In fact, this image is so challenging. If you can do this whole edit properly, trust me, you can replace the sky in any image. That's why I purposely put this in this course. It's a fairly challenging edit, but we're going to get through this, okay? So if I just take the quick selection tool like this and just try to run it like this on the foreground, you can see it kind of does an okay job, right? But it's still not very accurate, right? I can select the whole foreground like this. But what is the problem? If I zoom in, this time we have trees, okay? And trees are not that easy. Why? Because they have these gaps through which the sky is also shown. So how can we select the sky accurately here, right? And it's very important to get your selection, your first rough selection should be very accurate, because remember, how does select and mask work? Once we take this rough selection, we go into select and mask. How does select and mask work? It works by, when you start refining this, Photoshop will refine your selection according to what you selected initially. That is the reference point it uses. So if the sky is coming here in your original selection, Photoshop, once you start refining it like this, you can see it still does a good job, but it will miss a lot of areas. Why? Because your original selection also had something that you want to remove. You want to remove the sky, but your original selection also has that sky. So Photoshop might think that some of the tonal ranges here are okay to keep, okay, which is not what we want. So we want to accurately select these darker tones, and we want to avoid selecting the sky. So the question is, I'm going to click on cancel. The question is, how can we do that? Well, there's a very good tool which I've also shown you in my Photoshop for Beginners course. So right now I'm just going to press Ctrl D, Command D to deselect. And we're going to go to Select, and we're going to go to Color Range. This is an option which will easily allow you to select the sky or the foreground. It doesn't matter which one you select, because you can always inverse a selection by going to Select and clicking on Inverse, okay? So even if you select the sky properly, if you just inverse that selection, it's just going to select the foreground properly. Okay, so what can we do to select one of these things properly. So we're going to select the sky properly, and then we inverse it to select the foreground. So it's very easy using the color range. How the color range tool works is, and you may not be seeing this black and white look, that's because in the selection preview, none might be selected. And you may only be seeing the black and white look here. White means something is selected. Black means something will not be selected when you click on OK. So let me first explain you how this works. So in the select part here, we have sample colors, right? Now let's say for some reason, I'm just giving you an example. For some reason, we want to select this blue color from this card, only the blue color from this whole image. So what I can do is go over to sample colors. By default, this eyedropper comes instead of the cursor, and I can just click anywhere where the blue color is, and boom, it just selects. You can see the white part has now come on wherever the blue color is. So if I click on OK, we just select the blue color, right? This is how color range works. I'm going to press Control D, Control or Command D to deselect. I'm going to go to color range again. Similarly, what I can do is I can click anywhere on the sky and it starts to select this color. I can also add to the selection by, let's say you can see it selected most of the sky, but some of it here is coming like gray. Okay, in fact, just to get a better look, you can go to selection preview and click on grayscale. So you'll actually see this in a bigger way. So you can see most of the white stuff, that means this is going to be selected. But there's some amount here also. So I can press Shift. You can see this plus sign comes to the eyedropper just like with our selection tool. And I can add this color also by clicking on it. Boom. And you can see it takes in this also. But then it takes in a lot of these tonal ranges from the foreground also. But that's not going to be a problem like I'm going to be showing you. Okay. An easier way to do it is I'm just going to click on cancel. You can go to select. You can go to color range. Instead of selecting these colors here, in cases of sky, because it has a separate tonal range, it's very bright as compared to the foreground. What you can do is just from this drop down menu, you can also select highlights. That's the second way. You can see with highlights, it just selects automatically the bright range in your shot. Okay, which just makes it slightly easier. Okay, and you can even move around these sliders to further fine tune. So I can go to grayscale just to see what it's selecting. And I can use these sliders to fine tune my selection. You can see like this. So maybe I can just decrease the tolerance just here. So not enough of the foreground is coming. But if I zoom in here by pressing Control plus or Command and plus, I want to make sure that those gaps within the trees are taken for sure. Okay, something like this. And I can just click on OK. And you can see now this has selected even those little parts in this between those trees, which was not possible with the quick selection tool like we saw before. So we're getting a much more accurate selection, but there's one problem. The problem is there were some tonal ranges which were white in the foreground also. For example, this cover of this hut is also equal to this. So it has taken this selection also. But what we can do here, we can manually remove this by going to our lasso tool. And what is the button you press to minus from a selection? Alt or Option, right? So what I can do is I can press Alt or Option and then select all the parts which are a part of the foreground, where we don't want the sky, where the sky is not selected, but our foreground is like this. You can see like this house also. Okay. And just run it across like this. And all this will disappear from your original selection. And maybe this little bit of this house is left. So I can just select this also. Boom. Now we just have the sky, right? We have a very accurate selection of only the sky, even through the gaps of the trees. Now we want to select the foreground. Remember, you can proceed with the sky also. A lot of people do that, but I like to do it with the foreground, and you'll come to know that later when we go to select and mask. So it's very easy. Once you have the sky, how do you accurately select the foreground? Well, just go to select, click on inverse. Just reverses the selection. Now we have an accurate selection of the foreground. That means the trees, the pathway, the cart, and all these things, right? And now is the time where we can go over to select and go to select and mask. And now is the time that we can start to refine the selection. Select and mask. And now is the time that we can start to refine the selection. We could have done it in the first step also like this with the quick selection tool, and a lot of photographers do it. But I like to do it after using color range, because we have a much more accurate selection, much more accurate reference selection for Photoshop to work with. And now you're going to see it's going to do a fantastic job. Now, normally we work with this mode, right? With this red mode, which is the overlay mode. But in these cases, what I like to do is I actually like to select the last option, which is on layers. What this does is it actually puts the layer beneath that you had on top here so that you can actually see real time once you start to refine the selection how this is going to look. And this is the reason why we transformed this sky beforehand, so that it's big enough and we can work against it. Okay, that was the whole point. Now I'm going to zoom in. So I'm going to take my refine edge tool here. I'm going to zoom in, and now you're going to see it's going to do a fantastic job. So I can start now running it across these branches and the trees. And you can see right now it's not refined at all. This selection, you can see the fringes are being seen, right? Because this is the selection from color range, which does a good job, but won't do a refined job. You'll have to take this to refine edge tool like this. And then I can start working on it by just, running it like this. And you can see it may not absolutely do a great job right now, but we're going to refine the selection even further. But our main job is that, like for example, these things, these very light things can be very tough for Photoshop to remove. But we have a solution for that also. Like you can see it here also. But you can see here, all these fringes start to just get taken care of. And I have a 16 GB RAM laptop, and you can see that even this kind of gets a bit slow when it comes to using select and mask. Okay. So if you have anything slower than this, I'm guessing like a 4 GB RAM or something, you might just have to take some breaks. Okay. So this is a fairly heavy duty that Photoshop is performing, but you can see it's just beautifully getting rid of those halo-like fringes that were there, which look very bad against the sky. Now it's kind of getting a much more realistic look. There's still a bit of light halo here. Like I said, there's a tool for that, which is called the Shift Edge tool, which we're going to use after some time. So you can see this is fairly good. We don't have to do anything about this. Not enough of a halo here, so you can leave this. Maybe some parts here, I can just run like a bit of halo is being seen here. And most, if you just see a white line here, that's okay. Because remember, we are also going to put that faded horizon gradient that we put later, like we did with the Goa image. And that is just going to make this invisible, okay? But at least something like this, we can still run. You see how beautifully that just does the job, right? Maybe here also, though this won't be seen, to be frank, once we put the halo. Mainly, we're going to concentrate on the trees. So just run it across the trees. This. Okay. And this tree can be a bit challenging because there is a lot of light faded leaves that it has behind. And we're going to correct this at the end. Okay. Right now, we're just kind of refining our main selection. So at least we get something better than what color range gave us. Okay. We can see it is start to give those ghost-like look. Okay. And you can see we have kind of a decent selection. I can just go through each part here just to make sure nothing is left here. Okay. See how beautiful that tree looks. Now it doesn't have those fringes, right? Okay. Now the issue is, and if you ever find that it has taken something from your main selection, from the foreground, what you can do is you also always have this manual brush tool. Okay, for example, if you found that it had taken, something like this. So you can also take this and just add to your selection to remove this. You can always add, like for example, let's say if I zoom in here, it has taken this part in the selection. So I can always go here and I can tell Photoshop, no, this is a part of my main selection, please add it back, okay? Like, just look out here also, yeah, this is fine. Okay, fine. So we have a fairly good selection. But the issue here is that if I zoom in, we're getting those ghost-like things are still coming. Those very faded parts, which can be very tough with a refined edge also. That's why I told you, this is a pretty challenging edit. Okay, because usually if it's an easier or even a medium difficulty edit, at this step we'll be done and we can just click on OK. But you can see here we still have to perform this shift edge step. So what is shift edge? So shift edge means that how much of the edge do you want to either protrude or pull inwards from your original selection. For example, right now it's at 0, but just see what happens when I take it towards the plus side. Can you see? Photoshop is adding to the selection. That means it's putting it outwards. But if we go the other way, that means I go towards the minus side, just see what happens. It starts to actually take away and it starts to just get rid of those ghost-like things. So see, this is at 0 or +1, almost the default. And just see, if I take it towards the minus, it's just pulling that inwards. Okay, now the downside of this is, yes, it gets rid of those ghosting things, but it also gets rid of some of the details in your good selection. For example, this was at, okay, something like 0 or -1. But if I take it to something like this, it just eats away that. But eating away, it's okay, right? When you see it from a zoomed out look, this won't make too much of a difference. But those fringes look very bad. Okay, so whenever you have a choice between eating away just those edges, choose that over the fringe. Okay, so for example, here I can go even to something like -33, -35. You can see the tree looks pretty good from here. So see it probably from this level. Okay, but here you can see this was again at something like 0, and we've been able to go just get rid of those whitish looking things. And once that gradient tool comes, the white one, this is going to reduce further. And like I said, there's one more step remaining, which is using the clone stamp tool. This will just completely take care of that. Okay, so I'm going to use, let's say, -36. Overall, our selection now looks good. And we can just press and click on OK here. Boom. So you can see we have a fairly accurate selection now. Now some of these things, like for example here, this is coming. So we can again go back to select and mask and just add this. So a better way to see this would be, probably this won't be even recognizable, to be frank, in your main image, but still, just to be a perfectionist, whenever you're slightly just fine-tuning your image, you can again select this red color just to see whatever has been taken from the foreground. That is just easier to see that. Okay, so we can take our main brush tool here and we can just add this back. Okay, like I said, even if you don't do this, no problem. It probably won't show too much. There are very, very minute selections like this. It's not always possible to get absolutely 100%, but yeah, maybe some here also. It is a tedious job. Like I said, this is a pretty challenging edit. There's so many, the problem is there's so much common between the foreground and the sky, okay? But I think this is fine. We won't be too perfect about this, but I think this is looking good. Now what I can do is, we have a very, very accurate selection of the foreground. I simply just have to select a layer mask and boom. You can see this is absolutely looking fantastic now, okay? Now, just to make it more realistic, first of all, what you're going to do is, before we add that gradient, we're going to increase the canvas size, because the sky right now is not fitting this image, right? So what we're going to do is, just to increase the canvas size, you can go to the crop, make sure this layer is selected, your first layer. Go to the crop tool. Usually the crop tool is obviously used for cropping, but you can also do the reverse. So if I zoom out, I can actually pull it outwards and it'll increase in its canvas size. So maybe I can take it to something like this. I can press enter. You can see now it just accommodates that tall image from here. Now what we can do is, we can actually, select this and move it. So you see, I'm using the move tool here, and we can get it to an area that we would probably like, something like this. Okay, boom. So this looks pretty good, right? Now, what we can do is, we can add that gradient just to give it a more realistic effect, and also we'll just get rid of those little halo things that we were having. Okay, so what we can do is, we can take our gradient tool here and we can just create a new layer, make sure white is selected, and just run it like this. Okay, maybe I'll just run it slightly higher, something like this, and then reduce the opacity. This is too strong right now. Something like this, probably. And you can see this also gets rid of so many of those things, like some of the halos were coming, on the edges of the cart, which have disappeared. Some of these have disappeared almost, and even it'll help here, though here you can still see those things, which we're going to get rid of. So don't worry about that. Okay. So now the thing that we're going to do is the fine tuning of this part of this particular tree and a bit of this we're going to do at the end. Okay, that'll be the last step that we do. Before that, what I want to do is, right now our shot is looking pretty good, but what I want to do is there is a difference right now between the color temperature of the sky and the foreground. Why? Because this foreground was clicked in an overcast sky, so it was pretty cool, and this is pretty warm. So what we're going to do is we're just going to warm up only the foreground. Though you can do this in Lightroom also in our local adjustment step, I just like to do this in Photoshop itself. So first of all, let's do that. All right, so how are we going to do this? We're going to use a function called as clipping mask. So what clipping mask allows you to do is it will only allow us to change the temperature of the foreground in accordance with the background here or the sky here. So how that will work is you select your top layer, okay, because this layer is the one which has a selection of only the foreground, right? What we're going to do is we're going to go to our adjustment functions. We're going to select the function called as color balance here, which allows us to just change, make things cooler, make things warmer. This is similar to the temperature slider in Lightroom. So what we can do is you can see it's a pretty warm sky and it's a pretty cool foreground. So what we can do is we can add a bit of yellowness and redness to it like this. But right now, what is the problem if I do something like this? It's affecting the entire image. You can see it's also affecting the sky. But we only want this to affect the foreground. So what we can do is, this is where the clipping mask function comes into play. You can right click on this layer, which was our adjustment function layer, and then just click on this option which says create clipping mask. Just see what happens when I click on this. You can see this arrow comes here, which is telling that this function is only applicable to this layer, not to all the layers. Okay, so what happens with this? Can you see? The effect is now only coming on the foreground. Just see. Only it's affecting the layer beneath it. Isn't this fantastic? Now we can easily reference it with the sky and we can decide how much we want. So maybe this was let's come back to our default. This was something like the default. I just want to add a bit of warmth here to the foreground, like this. And a bit of reddishness, because the sky is pretty red, you can see. And maybe a bit of magenta, like this, just a tiny bit. You can see now, this is the effect, right? I can probably reduce the opacity a bit. And boom, we're done with this. So this was before, it was too cool. Now it kind of matches the look of the sky, right? So this is fantastic. So we're almost done with this edit. It's just one step left, which is correcting those halo-like things in our trees. Now, a lot of people probably won't even do this, but I'm just showing you that if you have to be a perfectionist, we can even get rid of it. Though most people won't be able to see this also. I think if you zoom out, you can see this is looking pretty good and pretty realistic on its own. But we'll still do that because I'm going to teach you about a function which is very, very important, okay, which can really be helpful, which is the clone stamp tool, but a way to use the clone stamp tool in a particular way. Okay, so what we're going to do is, first of all, we're just going to create a new layer and we're going to stamp all these layers together on this layer. That means otherwise using the clone stamps tool can be pretty tricky because you'll have to make sure we're copying and pasting from the right layer. So it's better, since this is the last step before we move on to the Lightroom part, it's better to just do this on a merged layer where all the layers have been pasted or stamped together. So how do you do that? If you've done my Photoshop for Beginners course, Control-Alt-Shift-E. So make sure this new layer is selected, then Control-Alt-Shift-E, or that'll be Command-Option-Shift and E, and boom. You can see that all these layers get stamped over to this new layer. Now we have got nothing to do with these layers. It's a slightly destructive process, but it's okay because this is the last step, okay? Now I'm going to zoom in to that part, the challenging part, okay? And now we're going to use a clone stamp tool to get rid of these things, which even the Refine Edge tool could not, okay? So usually these are the settings on the clone stamp tool. This will be set to opacity will be 100, flow will be 100, and this is how it is. Now, what is clone stamp tool if you're using it for the first time? Well, clone stamp tool is just basically a tool to copy paste things. For example, if I press Alt or Option with this tool, it turns into this icon here, which means I can copy or source a point now. So I'm telling Photoshop, I click my mouse here, and then if I go anywhere, I can start basically copying and pasting it over something else, right? This is how the normal clone stamp works. So I can go here, I can probably reduce the opacity of the brush so that it has a subtle effect, and then I can copy and paste like this. But this is going to take a lot of time, right? Because you'll have to be very careful. Let me show you why. Because let's say I do something like this, I copy it here, and then I'm pasting it here, and boom, I start to lose my tree also. I lose that halo thing, but I start to lose the tree also, which is not something we want. Okay, so if you have to do it like this, you'll have to zoom in, go very slowly to those parts, remove them, and that can be done. It's just going to take too much time, so it's going to be very inefficient way of going about things. There's a better way, which is, you can even increase your opacity slightly, but the trick lies in this function called as mode, okay, which allows you to select something called as darker color. And what this allows you to do is, if I copy and if I start pasting, my tree doesn't go away. Okay, see, I'm just going to select normal. If I copy, if I do something like this, the tree also disappears because it's copying and pasting the entire thing originally. But if I select darker color, what I'm telling Photoshop is I'm copying something from here, and when I paste, only paste it on areas where the parts here are not darker than this. Wherever it is darker, leave it as it is. But if it's lighter than what I've selected, then you can paste it. So paste this darker color here only on areas which are lighter than what I've selected. That's why this is darker color. So it's darkening the areas, but only those areas which are darker or which are lighter than the original selection. For example, if we zoom in more, you'll be able to see this. I'm sourcing my point from this gray area here. Okay. Now, when I start pasting it on these green areas, which are the areas which are lighter and which are the areas that are darker than this? These parts are lighter. So Photoshop will darken them. But these areas, the original tree is darker, so Photoshop won't affect them. So you can see if I source this and I do this, this doesn't get affected, but this does get affected. So this allows us to just work on this in a very fast way. You can see, because I don't have to worry about overrunning things. So I can source something close to it so that you don't get patches. But you can see here how easy this is. I'm going over this, but that is not disappearing, right? You can see here. Boom. So I can afford to, it allows you to make mistakes. You can go over your tree and still nothing will happen. You can see. And even if it adds a bit to it, that's okay. That won't be seen. Okay, the important thing is select darker color and source something close so that you don't, the color is as close as possible to the sky that is near the tree. Okay, so I'm sourcing it right next to the areas. You can see here. Right, I'm not going to be absolutely perfect about this. It's going to take a fair amount of time, but much less time than the normal mode. So you can see we have some of those halo things, but now it'll be bordering on perfection if we try to remove that. Okay. Similarly, we can go over to this part, and to be frank here, almost most of those halos just got disappeared because of the gradient tool that we use. And now, if I come here, if I zoom into that part, even if I see from a pretty zoomed in range, you can see that you just got rid of that thing. And nobody can say that this was artificially created, right? Unless until you really zoom in this much and you're seeing just a bit of that, and that's okay. Nobody's going to do that. Even if you take a printout of this shot, it's not going to affect, right? So we don't want to be perfectionists. We just want to do a tight job, and we've been able to do that. So you can see that was a lot of hard work. But like I said, this was a very challenging edit. This is like an advanced level edit. If you can understand this, if you understood this, and you were able to replicate this, trust me, you can do sky replacement for any image. Now we're just left with one step, which is we're going to save this as a TIFF file, because even I have closed my Lightroom. So I'm just going to, save this. Let's say I can call it edit to TIFF. And I can just save this. And then I can just import this in Lightroom. And then we can just take it over to the develop module and start working the same way. Okay, so I'm going to see you in the Lightroom for the further color grading and local adjustment steps. I hope that you like this. I know it was challenging, but I hope it was fun for you. I'll see you in Lightroom. Bye for now.